Prior Halston tore the sketch from the wall in front of everyone. Not in a back hallway, not in a quiet corner where cruelty could pass for carelessness. She did it inside the grand lobby of Meridian Tower, beneath $200,000 worth of pendant lighting, while investors, journalists, city officials, and champagne-holding guests watched what happened next become the most defining moment of the evening. Maeve Clara Doran, 37-year-old wife of Caden Bourne and the silent controlling owner of Doran Architecture Group. The $1.4 billion firm Caden's family had been dropping into dinner conversations for most of the past year, stood near the far end of the lobby with her hands still at her sides. She wore a charcoal dress, no statement jewelry, no name tag that announced what she was. To most of the room she looked like a quiet +1, maybe a consultant invited as a formality. That was the point. It had always been the point. The framed sketch on the lobby feature wall was not decoration. It was a hand-drawn pencil blueprint of Doran Group's very first commissioned building, drawn by Maeve's mother, Clara Doran, at a drafting table on the night the firm was born. The lines were imperfect in the way only real work is imperfect. The paper had browned at the corners. Clara's initials were pressed into the lower right in a hand that had shaken slightly from exhaustion and from hope at the same time. To visitors, it looked like sentimental display art, the kind of thing old firms kept to signal warmth. To Maeve, it was the last object in the world that still felt like her mother's hands. Caden Bourne, 39-year-old husband of Maeve and the public-facing developer who had spent the past year building his family's reputation on the strength of Doran Group's name, stood near the Champagne Tower with his associates surrounding him. Prior Halston, 31-year-old luxury PR consultant, and the woman Maeve's private investigator had already identified in 22 time-stamped photographs, smiled the way people smile when they believe a room has already chosen them. Roberta Bourne, 62-year-old mother of Caden and the careful architect of the Bourne family's social aspirations, raised her glass toward Priya with undisguised warmth. To people who understand the value of the rooms they enter, Roberta said, her eyes sliding toward Maeve and settling there with calm dismissal. Spencer Cade, 46-year-old real estate broker and Caden's closest business ally, smiled on cue. Earlier that evening, Maeve had watched Spencer work the room with a folder tucked under his arm, hand-delivering a message to every investor who mattered, that the Bourne family's relationship with Doran Group was exclusive, private, and on the verge of something significant. The language was careful enough to avoid a direct lie, precise enough to build one. Zoe Bourne, 27-year-old sister of Caden, stood near a cluster of journalists with a glass of sparkling water and the still, cataloguing attention of someone planning what to post later. Maeve had watched all of it from the lobby's edge. She had watched Caden accept compliments for a tower she had designed from the foundation drawings to the roofline. She had watched Roberta describe the Bourne vision to a city councilwoman who nodded as if the words made sense. She had watched Spencer circulate with a folder she had already quietly photographed. A folder containing what appeared to be a Doran Group partnership letter, bearing the firm's letterhead and official language, but an authorization code that belonged to a filing nearly 3 years out of date. Not quite right. Close enough to fool someone who didn't know what right looked like. Someone did. Then Priya turned toward the lobby's feature wall and tilted her head at the framed sketch beside her. "Is this supposed to be art?" she said loudly enough to carry. Soft laughter moved through the people nearest to her. Maeve's voice was quiet. "Please don't touch it." Priya looked at her the way someone looks at furniture that has spoken. "It's taking up wall space in a $100 million building." She reached up. "That is not yours to move." Priya smiled. "Then stop acting like it matters." She pulled. The frame came off the wall bracket wrong, tilting forward, heavier than she had expected, slipping from her grip. The sketch hit the marble floor glass side down, the crack of the frame splitting at one corner, the thin shatter of protective glass going white. Clara Doran's pencil lines, 40 years old, pressed into paper that had survived a studio fire and 2 office relocations, face down against the lobby floor. For 1 second, the room went silent beneath its elegant lighting. Maeve did not run. She walked because her mother had taught her that panic was a luxury she could not afford in rooms where people were watching. She knelt and turned the frame carefully. The glass had broken clean. The paper was whole, except for one edge slightly compressed against the backing. Clara's initials still visible in the corner. A camera flash went off from somewhere to her left. She looked at Caden across the lobby. She gave him one last chance to be her husband. His jaw tightened, not with shame, with calculation. "Let it go, Maeve," he said under his breath, already angling back toward the investors. This night matters. Roberta stepped forward. These older display pieces can always be refreshed. Modern lobbies shouldn't read like archives. Her voice was light and untouched, the voice of someone who had never been attached to anything fragile. Maeve rose from the floor with the broken frame in her hands. She looked at Caden, at Roberta, at Priya already pivoting back toward her audience, at Spencer pretending he hadn't seen, at Zoe studying a point above everyone's heads. "You have no idea what you just broke," Maeve said. Priya glanced back. "A frame?" Maeve's voice stayed very calm. "No," she said, "my patience." Across the lobby, Prentice Ward, 58-year-old public CEO of Doran Architecture Group and the man who had protected the Doran family's legacy through 2 recessions and 1 contested inheritance proceeding, caught her eye. He gave the smallest nod. The building's security director had already received his signal. Every camera angle in the lobby was being preserved. Like, share, and subscribe to Broken Promise Tales. And stay until the end, because the sketch they called Worthless was about to reveal the woman who owned every room they had ever entered. Maeve walked out of Meridian Tower into the cold November air with the broken frame wrapped in a cloth napkin she had taken from a passing server's tray. The Doran Group archive had always felt like breathing. Maeve had spent her childhood in rooms like this, long tables under warm light, flat files full of drawings, the particular silence of a place that held work instead of things. Clara had built this archive in the firm's 2nd year, in the belief that beautiful buildings deserved to be remembered in more than photographs. When Maeve entered that night, the staff straightened without performance. The quiet recognition of people who understood, who had just walked through the door. Lorne Aldecott, 50-year-old senior design director and one of 3 people alive who had worked alongside Clara from the very first year, was waiting beneath the magnifying lamp. His eyes went straight to the cloth in Maeve's hands. His face fell the way faces fall when someone they love has been hurt. He opened a black velvet pad on the table. Maeve set the broken frame down and opened the cloth. Clara's sketch lay between them. Lorne didn't speak for a moment. Then, carefully, "Clara brought me a coffee the night she drew this. She'd been working 19 hours. She said she was afraid to stop, because stopping meant the building might not happen." He touched the edge of the table, not the paper. She was afraid, and she kept going anyway. That was who she was. Maeve pressed both hands flat on the table. She was 25 in her memory, sitting on a stool in her mother's studio, while Clara explained that the best buildings were never about what you could see. They were about what you couldn't, the light between things, the breath a room allows when it's been designed for people instead of photographs. She hadn't cried yet that night. She cried now, briefly without sound, the way she had learned to cry in years of holding everything inside rooms that weren't safe for truth. Prentice entered from the side corridor with Hollis Mabry, 54-year-old private attorney and the legal trustee who held and protected Maeve's controlling interest in Doran Group. Hollis placed a dark leather case on the table and did not ask how she was. He already knew. He looked at the sketch, then at Maeve. "Tell me what you want." She straightened and wiped her face once. "I want the truth to have the right audience." Hollis nodded and opened the case. The folders went across the table in order. The first, lobby camera footage, time-stamped and preserved, showing Priya's hand on the frame, the sketch falling, Caden watching and turning away. The second, a recording from the reception area earlier that evening, captured in open space under club security signage. Spencer telling 2 investors that the Bournes were positioned to co-direct Doran Group's next development phase. Then, moments later, Caden's voice on the same recording, lower but clear. "She doesn't need to understand the business side. She just needs to stop making everything sentimental." A pause. Then Priya's voice, amused, "That sketch was the first thing I'd get rid of. And Caden, she holds on to things. Someone should have corrected that a long time ago." Maeve listened to it twice. She felt the words enter her the way cold water enters, not with drama but completely. The third folder, photographs of Spencer's fake partnership letter. The fourth, investor communications that had reached Doran Group since groundbreaking, asking to confirm whether the Bournes held formal roles. They did not. They never had. The fifth folder Hollis left under his hand. "What's that one?" Maeve asked. "The records of everything you gave them, without their knowing." He placed 3 documents on the table. The first, an anonymous loan guarantee that had saved Caden's hospitality venture 18 months ago, routed through a Doran subsidiary holding fund. Caden had believed it came from his bank's discretionary line. He had never asked who arranged it. The second, the private settlement Maeve had covered when Zoe's promotional partnership collapsed under a breach of contract claim $48,000, processed through a legal buffer firm and never traced back. The third, the medical billing that had been quietly cleared after Roberta's cardiac procedure, handled through the family's supplemental insurance that Maeve had been funding from her personal trust accounts since the second year of their marriage. Maeve looked at the papers for a long time. "I didn't do those things to own them," she finally said. Hollis's voice was gentle. "No, you did them because you loved a family that lived under your protection and called you irrelevant in the same breath." The words landed the way true things land, not loudly, but with weight that doesn't lift. Maeve looked at the sketch. She made her decision. "Preserve everything. Don't release any of it yet." She looked at Prentice. "Let them think I went home to fall apart." Prentice held her gaze. "And did you?" "Yes," she said, "but not only that." In the weeks that followed, the world existed in two separate versions. In one version, Caden told people that Maeve had been overwhelmed at the grand opening, that she had always been sensitive, that public events didn't suit her temperament. He said it with patient, slightly pained concern, the practiced expression of a man managing a delicate situation. Roberta agreed that Maeve had never been built for serious public life. Zoe posted from the opening night in photographs from which Maeve had been cropped, each one framing the Bourne family at the center of an evening they hadn't built. In the other version, Maeve arrived at Doran Group before sunrise every morning. She sat with Lorne in the archive and reviewed Clara's sketch under the magnifying lamp. Lorne worked to preserve it exactly. New glass, new backing, the compression mark at one edge kept visible rather than corrected. "The damage should be allowed to speak," he said. Maeve agreed. At one morning meeting, she noticed a folded discharge form underneath a junior designer's sketchbook, the kind hospitals send home with patients after procedures. She asked Lorne quietly what he knew. He told her. Yara Osei, 23-year-old drafting apprentice and newest member of the junior design team, had been working double shifts since her father's cardiac hospitalization 6 weeks ago. The family's coverage had a gap. Every internal hardship fund application had bounced back against an automatic threshold that required board approval. Board approval could take 6 weeks. It had already been 6. Maeve held board authority as controlling owner. She signed the relief authorization before noon, routed through the employee emergency reserve. No announcement, no ceremony. 3 days later, Yara knocked on the conference room door and stood in the frame with her hands clasped, looking at Maeve the way people look when language isn't adequate. Maeve only said, "Is your father resting?" Yara nodded. "Good. The Westfall facade review is Thursday. I'd like your numbers on the eastern elevation by Wednesday afternoon." Yara blinked, then she straightened. "Yes, of course, thank you." A pause, "Thank you." After she left, Prentice looked at Maeve. She shook her head before he could speak. "Don't," she said. "I wasn't going to say anything." "You were going to say I handle things the way Clara did." Prentice turned to the window. "I was going to say you handle them better," he said. "Clara was brave. You're patient. That's rarer." The invitation to the Meridian Design Summit arrived at Caden's office on a Tuesday in a heavy cream envelope bearing the Doran Group crest. Roberta held it before Caden finished reading. Spencer photographed it within 2 minutes. "Front row seating at a Doran Group event," Zoe said. "That's not courtesy. That's a statement." Caden read the final line of the invitation once, then again. The evening would conclude with a firm address by Doran Group's founding partner and controlling stakeholder. Something in the phrase sat differently than it should have. He couldn't locate why. "These firms always trot out a legacy figure for formal events," Roberta said, already moving past it. "What matters is that we'll be in the camera's sightlines when it happens." Caden set the card down and let Spencer pour the celebration drinks. In the Doran Group boardroom that same afternoon, Maeve sat at the long table while Prentice walked through the summit stage layout on the screen behind him. Hollis sat to her left. Lorne stood near the window. Elson Rhine, 44-year-old board secretary and the official responsible for issuing the summit invitations, pointed to the seating chart. The Bourne party had confirmed. 5 seats, 3rd row, clear camera sightlines. They would believe the proximity was an honor. They would use it immediately as evidence of their standing. Maeve looked at the printed script on the table. Her eyes moved to the line Prentice had asked her to review. She read it once, then again. Maeve Clara Doran, founding partner and controlling owner, Doran Architecture Group. For 12 years, that designation had existed only in legal filings and private trust documents and the careful mouths of a small number of people who had promised Clara they would protect it until Maeve was ready. Seeing it in a public script felt like stepping out from behind glass into a room that had always been hers. Hollis watched her hand rest on the page. You can still keep it quieter, a general acknowledgement, no full designation. I'm not afraid of being known, Maeve said. Then what are you afraid of? Her eyes moved to Caden's name on the seating chart. She stayed with the question honestly. I'm afraid of becoming someone who enjoys watching people fall. Hollis closed his folder halfway. Then don't enjoy it. Just stop holding the net. The night of the Meridian Design Summit, Caden wore a navy suit and accepted compliments in the third row. Priya sat beside him. Spencer worked the room behind them. Zoe photographed everything. They had not seen Maeve in the hall. Priya said it quietly into Caden's ear that her absence was confirmation. A woman who knew her place showed up. A woman who didn't disappeared. The summit opened with 2 sessions and a break. The room settled. The lights adjusted. Prentice walked to the podium. The awards portion of the evening, he said, would be preceded by a firm address. He looked up from his notes. Doran Architecture Group was founded 41 years ago by Clara Doran in a studio apartment in Philadelphia with 1 drafting table, 1 commission, and a hand-drawn sketch of a building she was afraid would never be built. He paused. Tonight that sketch is in the lobby of Meridian Tower. And tonight, for the first time publicly, the controlling owner of this firm will address this room herself. Roberta turned to Caden with a small, satisfied expression, composing the version she would tell later. Then Maeve walked onto the stage. The applause began before she reached the podium. Not scattered, full, rising from the walls inward, several people stood. Architects who had trained under Clara's firm rose first. City officials who had approved Doran Group permits over 2 decades joined them. Collectors who had commissioned the firm's residential projects were already on their feet. Priya's champagne glass stopped halfway to her lips. Caden did not speak. He could not. Maeve stood beneath the summit lighting in her charcoal dress. A small silver compass rose, Clara's pendant, worn publicly for the first time, at her throat. The screen behind her filled with white letters. Maeve Clara Doran, founding partner and controlling owner, Doran Architecture Group. Roberta's color left her face entirely. The woman beside her reached for her arm. Zoe's phone slipped onto her lap. Spencer stood halfway, reconsidered, sat down. Priya looked at the screen, then at Caden, then at the screen. Her mouth opened without sound. Caden stared at his wife beneath the lights. At the woman he had stood beside at 100 public events while positioning himself in front of her. At the woman who had knelt on the lobby floor to pick up a broken frame while he turned back toward his investors. At the woman whose name was now 40 feet tall and perfectly lit. Maeve touched the edge of the podium. She did not look at him yet. My mother drew the founding sketch of this firm at 2 in the morning, she said. She was 29 years old. She had no staff, no clients, and no guarantee that the building she was drawing would ever be built. The screen showed Clara's original sketch. Then a photograph of Clara standing on the sidewalk outside that first completed building, her hand shielding her eyes from the sun. She built this firm on one principle, that the best structures aren't the ones people notice. They're the ones that make people feel safe without knowing why. The room was entirely still. Recently, a piece of her work was damaged in a public room by people who believed it had no value because they didn't recognize what it represented. The screen changed, a lobby camera still, Priya's hand on the frame, the sketch tilting forward, the glass hitting the marble, Caden standing 15 feet away, already turning back toward his guests. A sound moved through the audience. Not a gasp, not silence, something between. Priya stood. 2 of Prentice's security team stepped into the aisle before she reached it. They did not touch her. The cameras already had her face. Hollis stepped forward from the stage's side. His voice was even and unhurried. For the record, Doran Architecture Group has not authorized any Bourne partnership arrangement, co-development role, investor mandate, or representation of firm interests by any member of the Bourne family or their associates. Doran Group has initiated formal legal review of all related investor materials, including correspondence misrepresenting the firm's internal structure and ownership. All claims of Bourne affiliation with Doran Group are without legal basis. All negotiations conducted under that premise are considered void and are being preserved as evidence. Spencer looked at his phone. 1 investor had already called. He looked at the screen. He did not move. Roberta sat perfectly still, her hand pressed to the seat back in front of her. Zoe's fingers moved across her phone, trying to delete the cropped photographs, the captions, all of it. But screenshots were already moving through private circles. Every carefully edited image now looked like what it was. Maeve looked at the room. Her voice stayed even. My mother left me this firm because she believed that beautiful work should protect people, not impress them. She paused. I intend to honor that. Caden found her in the side corridor, or perhaps she allowed him through. She stood near a window with the restored sketch in its new frame, leaning against the wall beside her. Maeve. His voice came out differently, smaller, stripped of the executive confidence he had been practicing for a year. She looked at him. You should have told me, he said, who you were, what you held, from the beginning. She had expected many things from him in this corridor: apology, grief, even anger. Not this, not that. Even now, with everything visible, his first sentence would be about what she owed him. I did tell you who I was, she said, every day. You only heard it when it came attached to a dollar amount. He opened his mouth, closed it. I didn't keep my mother's work private to deceive you, Maeve continued. I kept it private because when we met, you looked at me like I was enough without it. I wanted to believe you'd keep doing that. He watched his face. You stopped a long time before tonight. Hollis appeared at the far end of the corridor with a process server beside him. Caden looked at the sealed envelope, then at Maeve, then back at the envelope. The way people look at things they have been certain would not happen. The server placed the envelope in his hand. Mr. Bourne, you've been served. Caden stared at it. His fingers didn't move. For the first time all evening, fear occupied the space where certainty had lived. Divorce petition, Hollis said from a distance, alongside preservation notices covering all Bourne communications regarding Doran Group, and a separate legal hold on Spencer Cade's investor materials and correspondence. Priya appeared behind Caden, her composure uneven now, the evening's confidence worn through. Caden, she said sharply, do something. He looked from Maeve to Priya, then back. Neither woman was reaching for him. One had used him. The other was done carrying him. There was nothing left beneath him to stand on. Maeve looked at him for a long moment, not with hatred. She had not wanted to become someone who needed his suffering in order to heal. You lost me at the tower, she said quietly. Tonight just made you understand it. She picked up the framed sketch from the wall and walked back toward the light. The legal work moved quickly once the evidence was organized. Spencer's investor materials were frozen under review within 2 days. Doran Group's communications office released 3 sentences of formal correction. No drama, no excess, accurate, and the language was clean enough that every investor who had received Spencer's folder understood precisely what had happened and what it meant for their exposure. 2 withdrew from preliminary discussions before the week ended and sent formal notices to the firm directly. Zoe's posts, the cropped photographs, the careful captions, the slow assembly of a Bourne-centered narrative, were already in the evidence folder before she finished deleting them. Screenshots had moved too fast. Roberta called 6 donors. None returned the calls. Priya's professional circle moved with the quiet efficiency of a luxury network, correcting a misalignment of power. Invitations stopped arriving. A co-presentation she had been scheduled for announced a replacement without explanation. The people who had laughed beside her at the lobby that night found reasons to be elsewhere. The fall was not theatrical. It was quieter and more thorough than theater, door by door, name by name, unanswered call by unanswered call. 3 weeks later, Maeve stood in the Doran Group archive before the wall of portraits Clara had commissioned in the firm's first decade. One for each designer who had built something that lasted. Clara's own portrait was at the center, her hands resting over a set of early schematics, her expression the particular combination of certainty and tiredness that Maeve had only ever understood in retrospect. The restored sketch hung beside it. New glass, new backing, the compression mark at one corner preserved exactly as Lorne had intended, visible under the right light, because he had said the damage should be allowed to remain as testimony. Yara appeared at the archive door and stood with her hands folded. I'm sorry to interrupt. I wanted to tell you, my father came home yesterday. The surgery went well. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were bright. Because of the fund you approved, I wanted you to know it worked. Maeve looked at her for a moment, something released in her chest. Not the grief, but the tight thing she had been holding between them. I'm glad, she said. After Yara left, Prentice stood in the doorway with his coat already on. The Westfall Commission confirmed this morning. The first full payment processes end of month. Maeve looked at the sketch. Half of the first payment goes to the Clara Doran Scholarship Foundation, she said. For first-generation students in architecture programs. Students who don't have parents who built anything for them. Prentice nodded. He didn't say anything else. She removed the compass rose pendant from her throat and held it in her palm. Her mother's, worn publicly for the first time in 12 years, and now returned to its quiet place in her hand. She looked at Clara's portrait, at the sketch beside it, at the firm that had been built from one afraid night of pencil work, and had survived everything that had tried to take it apart. She was not the same woman who had walked into that lobby 3 weeks ago. She did not want to pretend otherwise. The pendant in her palm, the sketch on the wall, the broken frame that had been rebuilt into something that could testify. None of it had come through the last few weeks unchanged, neither had she, and she was finished apologizing for what had been done to her, by people who thought her stillness meant she could be moved. If this story reminded you that quiet strength is still strength, like, share, and subscribe to Broken Promise Tales, and comment below where you're watching from. They thought they had torn a sketch off a wall. All they had really done was tear away the last reason she had been staying quiet.